Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 887, Lost Art. Petros shrugged. I never did take up a trade skill. I got too caught up in learning new shamanistic magic, and never had time for anything else. Over a century, I spent just looking for new spells and studying beasts with elemental abilities. Carl nodded. Learning skills from the beasts is how my class advances. Almost all my skills come from them, and the oddball skills that many of them use were generally obtained with my help. It's a good way to learn. Carl considered helping him out with a skill, but decided it would wait until the next time that they met. A little favor every time would stack up quickly, and make him a reliable friend of the dwarves. But having the dwarves here did give him an idea. He could add another expanded space on the main floor, using the entrance to the supply closet in the back corner of the showroom. Then, he wouldn't have to take guests into the living quarters, and they could redecorate with a flap of little butterflies' wings. 2 illusionary spaces in one house seemed pretty luxurious, but if the second one was only a small one, to make a sitting room out of a closet, he didn't think it would be a problem. As their power and fame increased, they were sure to receive even more powerful visitors. But those powerful visitors would mean that the powerful residents of Drod would be obliged to come and visit as well. Something that Carl was certain would happen within the next few hours. Once Domsk realized that a totem-ranked dwarf had come to his district and hadn't stopped in to say hello, he would surely come to visit the Darklight host as well. For today, they would host on the 3rd floor in the common area, but after that, Carl would have to create an entertaining space for others, as the library was the private domain of the guild members. The dwarves were completely lost in the new knowledge to the point that they had to be reminded twice that lunch was ready on the 2nd floor, as the 3rd floor sitting room did not have a proper table. You seem to have broken the dwarves. What did you give them? Dana asked as the visitors were still engrossed in their work conversation even as the food was being brought out. A copy of the Introduction to Dwarven Runecrafting. We don't know if anyone has the skills to fully use it, but they've got the introduction now, and they should be able to bring back some of their lost racial crafting skills. Carl explained. That should do it. Is that what they're waiting for? Someone to finish reading? Carl shook his head. They asked me to bond a ranger to a Kirin, a form of flying unicorn. As it turns out, the young Kirin is quite adorable, and like Lotus, easily excited by new things. So, the dwarves are waiting for their friend to finish touring the city. I expect that they'll be staying the night, as the new beast ranger will almost certainly return exhausted. Lotus laughed, and Naksha smirked. If the Kirin has half the energy that Lotus does, the ranger is going to need a refreshing spell to get through the day. By the time that we got back, I was running almost entirely on sugar and caffeine. I didn't even make it through the whole show. Lotus made a pouting face. And yet, you wouldn't transform back into a dragon, even though you were sleepy. You are a dragon cleric? Why would you need me to be in dragon form? Plus, you know my uncle. I'm sure you've seen a black dragon. Naksha asked. Carl chuckled. It's a Lotus thing. Dragons are just one more species to cuddle with as she sleeps. Winged void badgers, werbears, bloodbath spiders, they're all appropriate nap partners for her. Naksha chuckled. You know, despite being an overlord, I'm not that old yet. My dragon form isn't fully grown. Lotus shrugged. I have a bestial transformation, and it turns me into a meter-long green dragon whelp. So cute. I will show you after lunch. Everyone returned to their work for the day after lunch, and the ladies went to the dungeon with Naksha so that she could transform for Lotus. An overlord-ranked black dragon was pure overkill in the royal-ranked dungeon. But that didn't bother any of them. A dungeon run was still experience and income. Plus, it was important to Lotus that she got to see the dragon. Carl spent the afternoon helping the dwarves with the knowledge that he had, filling in theoretical portions for the ones who had related skills. Fortunately for the dwarven envoys, their wait was shorter than expected, and the ranger returned alone just before dinner. Lily fell asleep in the middle of the boardwalk, so I moved her to the separate space. I think that she's out for the night now, but I'm not sure if I can handle that again in a few hours. He whispered, as if afraid that he would wake her up. Carl gave the man a consoling pat on the shoulder. Now that she's seen most of the things, she should calm down. Everything is new to her, and she couldn't talk to explain it to anyone before. so you got months of pent-up frustration all at once. Just let her rest, and tomorrow will be slightly calmer. Also, you don't need to whisper. The amount of noise outside won't wake her up unless she's on guard against threats. If she's exhausted, she will be relying on you to do that for her, and it will be the intensity of your thoughts that is most likely to get her attention. The ranger sighed and flopped down into a chair. I know that I'm still a young man, but I suddenly feel old today. That amount of energy is unholy. Petros stroked his beard with a mischievous glint in his eye. Just wait until she thinks that someone is trying to steal your attention and affection away from her. You'll find that this is nothing at all. Chapter 888 Mission. After dinner, the dwarves returned home, and Carl began catching up on some of the most requested items. Not things that customers had paid to have custom-made for them, but ones that they had inquired about to see if they might be in stock sometime soon. That was how Davis was guiding the shop stock. First, replenish what they sold, then try to bring in the things that customers had asked about to see if they sold well too. The fact that it was all commander rank items now with a few royal rank utility items from Dora wasn't a big deal to them. The more powerful items might have caught the attention of passing merchants and the super wealthy, but the commander rank items comprised the vast majority of what people needed out of combat. If you were getting a charm made to repel dust in the house, it didn't need to clean the entire block, just the kitchen. The next morning, Carl was just getting started on the first item of the day, an Overlord-ranked mana storage trinket, when Naksha and Tessa came back from the gate together. There is a new mission on the day's sheet, Tessa informed the room. Oh, something caught the attention of the Red Dragon? Dana asked, looking up from a magical theory book. Apparently, the Black Dragon as well. I found Naksha there when I got the urge to go get a mission sheet from the guards. Tessa agreed. That was interesting, so Carl motioned for her to put it on the table, where everyone could see it. Most of the missions were lower-grade monster suppression missions, and a few bandit bounties. But the new one was a border mission. A few hundred kilometers northwest of Gazdri, in the northwest corner of the nation, there were reports of undead raids coming in from Bomgan. Now, the undead came in many varieties, from the shambling zombie and skeleton hordes, to intelligent forces like the Lich Lords and the Whites. The sheet didn't specify, but if it intrigued both the Black and Red Dragon, it was certainly organized with intelligence, and the threat level was considerable enough to cause mass destruction. Should we go over? I can open a portal to Gazdri, and then we can either get a wagon or I can bring the group over. Carl offered. Naksha looked confused. If you aren't using a wagon, how would we all get there? I could transform and fly with someone small. But the rest of you won't fit on the Thunderbird. Carl winked at her. I have a way to cheat, but it's a small secret. Naksha's full attention was now on him, and Lotus giggled as she realized that Carl had mastered the art of dragon baiting. They loved secrets and new information. It didn't matter what dragon species. They all shared that one common trait. It was practically etched into their bloodline. You have my word that I won't leak the information, Naksha swore. All right, everyone, please step through the portal, and I will bring us to the battle. Dana, would you mind giving her the grand tour? Ray did name this the Dana space, after all. Dana laughed and stepped through the entrance to the tiny world. Naksha was right behind her, and Carl smiled as he watched the dragon transform and begin flying around the separate space, examining everything. Then Carl gathered the remainder of the team, Remy included for a change, and went to Gazdri. The guild could function without them for a bit. They had enough workers to take care of everything, and Remy had taught her apprentices enough to make the common potions, even if they couldn't make the powerful healing potions that were one of the best sellers. When they had downtime in the evening, she could just make some and refill the stock in the guild bank. They weren't even leaving Drod, and Carl could easily access it from where he was standing in Gazdri. Carl called out Hawk, and then used Remy's swims through air racial ability to get up to his back. You two? First my sister, now the Carl swims in air. Hawk sighed. But you're still flying us to battle. Let's go see what was so interesting that it attracted both clerics. Hawk raced off to the northwest, following the directions from the guard's map. If it was big enough that Tessa noticed, they shouldn't have any problems finding the battle. 20 minutes later, they had located the most likely source of the threat. There was an entire army of skeletons, led by a Lich Lord and a large group of Death Knights. A small force of defenders had gathered, and there was a single totem among them to face the Lich Lord, but Carl had a good feeling about this one. If they worked it right, he might manage to get the overrank kill. It was only a 90% damage reduction, and they had a Kara. Carl landed at the back of the army of orcs and demons, then opened the exit to lead everyone out of the separate space. To others, it looked like he was just summoning them out of a portal, and the defenders began to perk up when they realized he had brought another overlord, and a half-dozen monarchs. Then the beasts came out of their spaces, and things started to look up for the defense team. Carl went to the totem, who was most likely the nearest city governor, and nodded in greeting. What does the total force look like? We only got the basics from the Drod City Guard's notice. He asked. This is what we're at this morning. There were 8 points of attack yesterday, but most started afternoon. Standard strategy says that they're testing the border to find vulnerabilities to spread the blight and claim more territory. Carl smiled. Well then, I suppose that I should take a team and go kick some teeth in. Did you want assistance with that Lich Lord? I can lend you a Kara. She can nullify magical attacks. The totem looked at him strangely. You didn't even look at my nameplate, did you? Carl belatedly checked it. Prince Stephen, 34th heir of Drod Cleric. Not a combat specialist. Chapter 889. Lich Lordling. Carl shrugged. In that case, you do the healing thing. I brought you a healing tree as well. A monarch-ranked green dragon cleric with the epic healing ability, Tree of Life. Then he turned to the group. Kara, Ray, you're with me. Everyone else spread through the defenders in pairs. Watch each other's backs and let's make the dragon gods proud. Thor bugled happily, and the defenders cheered. Tessa hopped up on his back, and Thor began to expand as he cancelled his shrinking abilities and activated his area holy damage spells. With Behemoth and Brutality both active, Thor was even larger than Ophelia's titanic dire bear form. The pair of them towered over the battlefield, dwarfing even the largest of the Wrath Demon Clan's warriors. Then Thor activated Bestial Raiment, the trusty armor skill that Carl used for daily fashion, and his already near impenetrable scales were covered in thick plates and layers of chain mail. Against any other army, that sight alone might have been enough to break their morale, but the undead knew no fear, and they continued their charge unabated. Tessa wielded her spear, but she was using it as a conductor's wand. She directed the armies nearby to spread and let Thor through, while she enchanted weapons and granted the defenders holy armor. That made the demons laugh, while the orcs cheered for a warrior with a sense of humor. The Lich Lord was floating above his armies, driving them forward, so Carl did the same and stepped up into the air. Any totem could walk on the mana flows, but Carl was still an overlord, and the sight caught the Lich Lord off guard. Carl smiled at the undead mage as he took out his bow and fired a poison arrow, coated in Void Blast and Nullify at the undead leader. A wave of the mage's hand brought up a black misty barrier, and the Lich Lord turned away toward the undead closest to the orcs. But the arrow punched through the barrier, sacrificing a Nullify in the process. Then Void Blast exploded as the arrow touched his barriers, and the Death Knights below him were thrown to the ground. No ignoring me. I will continue to poke you until you take this seriously, Carl warned. Ray, take out the knights first. They're probably a power support system. Kara was giving the Lich Lord a strange look. I have his box. It smells like him. See? She dumped a bone-covered coffin on the ground for a second, and the Lich Lord's eyes flared with magic and rage before she took it back. Well, it's not ignoring us anymore. Carl ignored Kara's smugness, and fired off a volley of arrows toward the Lich Lord. Magic exploded in the air as the undead leader realized that Carl could bypass only a single layer of barrier. Throwing multiple spells at the arrow stopped them with ease, but Carl was happy to keep attacking, and he only had to fire one arrow for every 2 spells. The whole battlefield began to change as Remy activated Apocalypse at the same time Hawk used Firestorm and Hellstorm on the undead horde, creating an extra layer of fiery blizzard to go with the multiplying tornadoes. The stronger undead hacked at the blizzards with skills, collapsing them, but the orderly charge was no more. I am going to rip your very essence from your body. The Lich Lord's voice echoed in Carl's mind. Carl smiled and equipped the Haint Claw. Funny, I was thinking the same thing. I wonder how much of a benefit I will get from the soul of a Lich Lord, he asked as he hung the Blade of Champions from his hip in the sword hanger created by the Bestial Raiment armor spell. Inky black explosions rocked the air around the Lich Lord as Kara split Void Blast into a dozen smaller explosions all around the Lich, and the ground under them shook from the aftershocks. Void Blast had directly become a totem-ranked spell when Kara advanced, and didn't suffer from the damage reduction that a totem would normally enjoy against an Overlord-ranked opponent. But a Lich Lord was not an average magic user, and even with Kara's attempts to nullify his defenses, he was still throwing up defensive spells as fast as Kara and Carl could launch attacks. Ray was already finished with the 10 Death Knights who were closest to the Lich Lord, and their bodies were in her space, just in case the Lich Lord tried to resurrect them. She wasn't clear on what they could do, but it must be some sort of necromancer to be leading an undead army. While the three-way battle between Carl, Kara, and the Lich Lord filled the sky with explosions and flashes of light, Thor was on a rampage through the skeletons. Consecrated Ground was even more effective against the skeletons than it had been against the wights, and the ones closest to him were effectively crippled before he even charged into them. On his back, Tessa held her spear high with a Darklight Host flag attached to it, periodically pointing into the crowd to smite a large group of skeletons who were giving the defenders trouble. Naksha and Hawk were flying overhead, bombarding the undead army through the storm, while Remy approached with her bodyguards and Carls, as well as a group of lizardmen who weren't bothered by the terrain of her Naga swamp. Even the butterfly was in on the fun, creating armies of demonic warriors that charged at the skeletons, causing them to turn away from the real enemy, only to have the illusions vanish an instant before contact. Then, she disguised the vortexes as stone pillars, and made the battlefield look like a ruined city. The skeletons couldn't understand that the pillars were still flaming vortexes with an illusion over them, and they stopped avoiding them. That led to them being sucked in, and the vortexes spawned their reduced power clones. They attacked the new ones, but ignored the ones hidden as stone pillars, which made the butterfly laugh hysterically. Stupid skeletons were great entertainment. Chapter 890 Imbalanced Skill Set. Carl began to draw on the mana storage totem that he had been making when he left for the battle, letting his own mana regenerate so that he didn't reduce any of the beast's supply. Kara had no such issue. She was much more mana efficient with her innate skill than Carl was, and the butterfly had made her invisible, so the undead had to guess where the explosions were coming from as she flew around the battlefield. Among the group, only Ray was in a bad mood. Skeletons had no bodily fluids at all, so she couldn't make them blow up. Smashing them into tiny bits was a small consolation when she had been looking forward to using blood destruction on a large scale. Maybe next time they would find nice juicy zombies. No, that would smell terrible. There was bound to be something better than skeletons among the undead hordes. At least her demonic oppression skill muted the magic of the constructs, slowing them and reducing the power of their attack skills. Most of them were royal rank with scattered monarchs among them. Only a very few were overlords, and those were mostly the Death Knights leading groups. But that made her new Entangling Vines skill, obtained from the Orcish druids, much more fun. She could throw down a large net of web, then raise vines to tear apart the trapped skeletons while she stabbed the strong ones. The Lich Lord was beginning to weaken, and some of the spells had managed to disintegrate portions of its robe. That was when Carl summoned his golems. Please choose a form. Ghostfire Thunderbird chosen. The dull imitations of Hawk might not have any of his skills, but Carl coated them in Ghostfire body without any issue, and they began to dive bomb the Lich Lord, who was already struggling to avoid annihilation. The sudden change in tactics was too much for the undead, and a single arrow made it through its barriers, exploding within the bone cage of its chest. That created a link back to the Haint Claw, and the battle between Carl and the Lich Lord turned into a tug of war for its soul. Carl focused all his attention on the Haint Claw, working to tear the soul from the undead, while the Lich Lord took blow after blow from Kara and the golems. The golems didn't do much but distract it, but that was all they needed to do. Each slip costed a bit more of its power, until the bone construct of the Lich Lord's body collapsed and the ghostly image of a pirate lord appeared in the air. No, I will not allow this. The Lich Lord roared, and then charged Carl, slamming into his body in an attempt to merge and possess him. That was the moment that the Lich Lord learned what true terror was. A glowing golden scale floated in the void of Carl's mental space, and the centuries-old undead lord felt its very essence destabilizing. Then, a ghostly butterfly appeared from one of the linked mental spaces, and gently brushed against him. As if attacked by a vampire, the Lich Lord felt its essence being drained at a rapid pace. But without a body, it had no way to defend. Of all the magic that it had learned, spirit combat was only a tiny fraction of a percent. But the butterfly happily fed on magical power, and that was all that a Lich Lord was, once robbed of its body. Within seconds, the totality of its power was siphoned away and flooded little butterfly's space, leaving only a tortured fragment of a soul that was being constantly drawn into the Haint Claw. "No, please, I cannot die. Not like this," the Lich Lord pleaded. Then it was gone. Skill advanced. Skill Master 4. Skill Master 5. Requirements met. All functions unlocked. Skills may upgrade to 1 rank and 2 grades above their base. Carl didn't have the time to think too much about that, as the battle was far from over, and the death of the Lich Lord had not stopped the skeleton horde, only left them aimlessly rampaging. Not that the orcs and wrath demons minded. With the extra area damage, the skeleton horde had already been weakened, and the warriors were smashing through them with ease while Tessa's holy armor was refreshed every half-minute or so, and absorbed the majority of the skills that the skeletons were using. It was the only skill that the average skeleton knew. While it wasn't much, in large numbers it would allow them to cut through entire villages with ease. But with the bodies of the skeletons weakened by the fires of Remy and Hawk's area skills, any of the Orcish warriors or wrath demons could smash through a skeleton every few seconds. Plus, Lotus and the totem-ranked prince were moving forward with the battle, keeping area healing effects active on the majority of the defenders at all times. Without the guidance of the Death Knights and the Lich Lord, it was devastatingly effective as a tactic. The skeletons just attacked whatever was closest. Carl took a moment to catch his breath and watch the battle. Tessa definitely needed a new spear with bonuses to smite or another ranged spell on it. The tactic of fighting from Thor's back was far too effective for her to stop now. Especially when Thor was so happy stomping on skeletons as consecrated ground crumbled them into dust. The battle was quickly coming to an end, and the Hellstorm spells had been stopped to minimize property damage. Unlike the flaming blizzard effects, neither Hawk nor Remy had learned how to make the flaming vortexes stop damaging everything that they touched. They didn't even have the decency to spare buildings caught in their range. As the last of the skeletons fell, Lotus transformed into beast form and flew up to Naksha as a tiny green dragon. Oh my god. She is even more adorable than I remember. How can a dragon be so cute? The black dragon rumbled. Carl landed next to Prince Stephen and gave the royal a polite nod. Your Highness, the battlefield is clear. Do you have any updates on other battles nearby? He asked. The demon tried not to let his shock show. He had just defeated a totem-ranked Lich Lord. Was that not enough of a feat for one day? Chapter 891. A spear for Tessa. Indeed, that was not enough for Carl. After all, he had cheated heavily. Not only was it a pure mage-type undead, subject to nullification, but it was also deprived of its phylactery, unable to restore its power, and the single best target for Carl and Kara to gang up on. Against any other enemy, things would not go so smoothly, he suspected. Nothing so far. It might be as much as an hour before the next attack is reported. The undead have been adjusting their deployments and splitting larger groups to deal with multiple defensive forces at the same time, depending on our deployment. He explained. Carl nodded and checked in with the team. Everyone was in good shape with no lingering injuries. Most of them were ready to continue if they needed to, though Lotus and Naksha were currently distracted, as the nature priestess chased the black dragon around the sky. She was limited by her tiny transformation, but Naksha was having fun, and every so often Hawk would give Lotus a boost, shoving her forward with a wind barrier, so that she could catch up again. After a few minutes of playing, the two priestesses transformed back, and returned to the group to get an update on the situation. We're waiting for news on the next point of contact. I will bring us there the same way again, and we can move along the line, keeping everything in order. Carl suggested. That sounded great to Naksha and Tessa. Their patrons were pleased with their performance here so far, but they would be even more impressed if they did it again. While they waited, Carl selected an Overlord-ranked spear that Ashbringer had created when the ore was first brought back from the Burra dungeon. It was in the guild bank, along with a number of other items waiting for upgrades or custom orders. Carl only knew a few abilities that would be suitable for her use. But if he combined Smite with Blessed Item, he found that he got Holy Spear, and that sounded like something appropriate. It took a while to work out how the runes would go, but they were still waiting when Carl started to carve them into the weapon, with additional runes for multiple targeting. The idea he had was hurling a whole wave of spears from Thor's back into the crowd of enemies. The demon prince watched Carl working, first with confusion, then awe as the weapon was completed and handed to Tessa, who had come to see what Carl was doing. That should be more effective from Thor's back than your current weapon. Carl offered as Tessa examined the spear. Overlord rank, epic grade. A unique spell, Holy Spear, and bonuses to holy damage with mana cost reduction? Yes, that would be a wonderful weapon for her. She would be able to use that in any situation, and for quite some time as it was a rank above her. You're a crafting guild? Prince Stephen asked, utterly baffled by the situation. Mostly. We do have some combat capabilities, but we're best known for our shop at the Western Frostfire Gate, in the Old Guard Barracks. The Darklight Host Guild House sells all manner of potions and crafted items, from Commander to Overlord rank. Though, by order of the Lord, we don't sell combat items over Commander rank without special order and quantity limits. If you're in the capital sometime soon, you should drop in. We've got a number of mana storage items on sale that are quite popular among tradesmen, shamans, and clerics. Carl explained. He held up the Overlord rank totem that he had been using during the last battle. He hadn't bonded it, and it was currently depleted, but slowly recharging itself. The prince sighed. With as many children as my father has, do you think that he gives us all enough allowance to afford such luxuries? Plus, I am a cleric of the god of magic. Unlike the demon gods, my god does not encourage his adherents to hoard wealth. Instead, we spend it all to obtain new knowledge, much like the adherents of the blue dragon do. Oh, that makes sense. I suppose that is also why you specialize in healing magic. I was under the assumption that the demon god clerics were less healing focused. Carl realized. Prince Stephen nodded. Exactly. Some of them cannot heal at all, while others specialize in damage transfer instead of healing. It's a drawback of having a whole population dedicated to one type of god, but there are still some of us who followed other paths. They continued to wait until mid-afternoon, before deciding that might be the only probing strike of the day. The undead of Bomgan were rarely on an urgent schedule, as they literally had forever to accomplish their goals. So, when they suffered a heavy setback like the loss of a totem, They could take time to regroup and make a new plan. All right, I will take my team back to Drod for the evening. There is no need to sleep out in the wilderness when I can open portals. Carl decided. I will send you a message if there is another attack here. With the dragon gods involved, your team will most likely want to return for future battles. Prince Stephen agreed. Tessa and Naksha both nodded, confirming his guess, while Carl opened the portal back to the open ground outside the gates by the guild house. The guards were startled for half a second when the portal opened, but when they saw who was coming through, and then the prince waving to them from the other side, they didn't make any complaints about the proper location for portals. After all, the guild house was right there, and they were outside the secured inner city so the wards wouldn't trigger. Welcome home, Darklight. Host, did you have a productive day? The guard on duty asked, while the other made a discreet trade of chocolates for a bag of herbal cigarettes from Lotus. Carl recalled that the Lord had warned them about that, or maybe it was smoking them at work. But as long as she wasn't caught, it should be fine. Indeed we did. We helped eliminate a totem-ranked Lich Lord and his skeleton army. Prince Stephen says that there will likely be future attacks, so we asked him to contact us through system message. The dragon gods are interested in the outcome. Carl explained. Oh? Well, that does make things feel a bit more serious. Chapter 892, Weapon Upgrades. Carl spent the rest of the afternoon making assorted items for the shop, in case someone with too much money came in while they were away, and then turned his attention to the equipment of the rest of the group. Dana used a narrow, straight blade. Ophelia liked axes, though the form didn't matter as much as she usually fought transformed if it was serious. Lotus could use an upgraded healing staff, and Remy could use one for extra spell power, or lowered casting costs, as she liked to go all out with stacked area effects, which rapidly drained her mana pool. It was extremely impressive, but in a longer battle she really did struggle with her mana levels, and simply played it off as reducing the area output as the number of enemies dwindled. That worked most of the time, but there was no telling what they were going to face in the near future. Especially not when they met with a totem-ranked Lich Lord today. If that was the standard of all the attacking groups, they would have to hope that there were more combat-oriented city leaders along the border. It would make sense for most of them to be strong combatants, as they were bordering not only a hostile nation, but one full of undead, where the spread of their cursed energy could render land barren for years after they had occupied it. In conditions like that, even occasional losses would be catastrophic and recovery would be a generational process, not a simple matter of defeating the enemy next time, unless that next time came soon enough that the land hadn't lost its life force to the undead horde. Even just passing over on their way somewhere would begin to wither the plants, so Carl assumed that even a few months would be enough to cause irreparable damage if the undead lingered in the area. Carl started with the easiest, a new healing staff for Lotus. He had already made her multiple healing items, so he knew the basic rune clusters pretty well. But this time he added a spell to a nature stone to increase her healing output. Healing Totem was a shaman spell, but the requirements to activate a spell on an item were much less restrictive, and Lotus had an unfathomable affinity for the nature element. If anyone other than the shamans could use a healing totem, it would be the green dragon clerics. Then he added runes for immense amounts of mana storage, reduced casting costs, increased healing effects, and stamina regeneration. The Monarch ranked would held an Overlord ranked inscription at epic grade very well, and the runes were a happy leaf green color all along the dark brown wood. Carl called Lotus over and handed her the new item. Here, try out the spell and let me know if it works properly. It's originally a spell that appeared for Remy, but I think that you can use it, he explained. Lotus picked up the staff, which began to hum with power in her hands, then activated the nature stone. For wooden totems, all shaped like Remy, appeared evenly spaced around her, and pulsed with healing energy. Oh, that works very well. It's nearly as much healing magic as the healing tree, but I can put them further away so that I'm not always the target. Lotus realized. Doubled area healing that could be cast on an infirmary staging area to even if Lotus needed to change locations or transform to perform other tasks. That would change the flow of any battle. They also had a much longer duration than the burning venom totems that Remy usually used. They didn't vanish after half a minute. They just continued to sit there and pulse with magic until she finished her inspection of the item and retracted them. Thank you. Are you making new poking sticks for everyone? She asked. Only you, Remy, and Tessa. Dana will get a sword and Ophelia will get an axe. I'm not sure what weapon Naksha would prefer, as she was fighting in dragon form. Lotus smiled at Carl. Alright, I have my mission. I will go find out what her favorite shaped weapon is and tell you before you finish with the others. Carl moved on to an axe for Ophelia as there was a two-handed war axe in the guild storage. Ashbringer was making a new blade for Dana, in the same style as the one she was using, but it wasn't ready yet. So her turn would have to wait. Carl used a firestone to imbue with flaming body, and then added skill power, strength and lifesteal on hit to the runes of the weapon. The combination made for a wonderfully deadly weapon, and it would let the berserker self-heal as she fought, reducing the need for a cleric to be nearby if she went on a rampage. Carl left that one out on the table and began on a staff for Remy: mana storage, mana cost reduction, spell power, elemental damage, and a nice Overlord-ranked lightning gem with even more mana and mana collection embedded at the top of the staff. Just what Remy needed. That brought Carl to Dana's blade, still hot from the forge. To complement her fighting style, Carl gave the gem in the hilt swims through air, which was a passive, so she didn't have to use mana to walk on air anymore, and then enhanced the blade entirely for skill power and reduced mana cost to the epic grade. That would add to her combat longevity, while increasing the damage done by her golems. The new Greater Golem was a beast in combat, easily tearing apart skeletons at its own rank when it was fully buffed by Carl's skills. So, giving it even more damage would solidify its role as Dana's guard dog, while her epic guard was free to work as her wingman, as they shared the same primary attack. Spells. Naksha wasn't around to answer, so Carl went for a simple choice. She was a cleric, so she got a staff with skill power, mana storage, and mana regeneration on it. That should let her do whatever she needed, while a spell gem of haste would let her do it faster. That would also increase her flight speed, making her breath attack cover a larger area. With all the new epic grade Overlord weapons, the group would be in an excellent spot for the next battle. But Ray had plans as well. It wouldn't be fast, art took time, but she could make full new suits of clothing to replace the old ones. She was an Overlord now, but only their workwear had been upgraded. That needed to be remedied. Chapter 893. Choose your adventure. Once the weapons were done, Carl just had to locate everyone to pass them out. Some were easy to find. Ophelia was training guard candidates out in the yard, and Carl could bring her the axe whenever he wanted. Remy was in her alchemy lab in the library space, but he just put her staff in the Naga Queen's space, against a bookshelf on her altar. The hard ones were tracking down Lotus, who had vanished as soon as he had finished talking to her, and Tessa, who had run off with Thor and Naksha. Actually, that made it easier. Thor, pass this to the Black Dragon, would you? Done. Oh, she's delighted with her new stick. Thor agreed. Carl went out to the yard with Ophelia's axe in hand, and the whole training group stopped to see what was going on that involved weapons being drawn. Ophelia, test this and see how it feels in your hands. I had Ashbringer make this with you in mind, and enhanced it to complement your fighting style. Carl called as he walked over. The big werbear grabbed the two-handed axe from Carl and hefted it easily, then gave it a spin around her hand to check the balance. Not bad, though I wouldn't expect anything that comes from Ashbringer's forge to be less than amazing. Then she transformed into a dire bear and made a casual swipe of her paw at the air before transforming back to a workbear. It bonded perfectly, and works properly with the dire bear transformation. Having two smaller weapons gives a wider variety of buffs, but this is a much more powerful weapon, and it should add much more to my attacks than the others did. Thank you, Carl. And Ashbringer, who I know is listening from in the forge. Carl laughed as the sound of hammering paused for a moment, then gave two ringing taps, clearly of the hammer directly on the anvil, before returning to an intermittent working pattern. Now they should all be ready for the next battle, with Overlord-ranked armor and weapons. Carl couldn't say how long it would take them to advance in battle, but they had won some significant battles in the recent past, and the system recognized them as a party, so they were presumably sharing bonuses. There was some sort of standard to the advancements, but Carl didn't know if it was deliberately unclear how long it took to move up a rank, or if the method to judge it had simply been lost to time. Most likely, there was supposed to be a progress meter of some sort in the system interface, and they had all just forgotten how to turn it back on. Once someone did, that would be a turning point for training methods. Being able to clearly see what was working, what was not, and what only worked a few times before stopping, would revolutionize training for everything. But there was not going to be a lot of time to be training for anything this week. As true to his word, Prince Stephen sent them a battle update at the end of the day. There had been 6 possible engagements located for the next day, and they had all been forwarded to the city guard as well, to be put on the morning's sheet. Some of the battles would begin early, some later in the day, but those 6 were the ones that the military were the most confident were going to happen. Carl waited until they had finished eating to bring up the information. We have 6 locations identified for battle tomorrow. There are 2 that look like they might be above our pay grade with multiple totems and hundreds of overlords, but there are 4 that should be at our rank or casier. One of them is just awakened and ascended rank skeletons, so we can likely skip that unless someone wants to go charging through them for fun. These 3 are the most likely choices. None has a reported totem rank leader. 1 is a group of lich lords with their summoned undead. 1 is zombies, and 1 is a mixture of wights and skeletal hounds. Does anyone have a preference? He asked, then waited for the others to think about the answer. Ray was obviously going to go for the zombies, as they were the only non-skeletal option. Her new skills worked best on the living, but zombies should be close enough that her blood destruction skill would destroy them with ease. But fighting against new types of enemies was good as well. There was no summon type of monster specified with the group of Overlord-ranked Lich Lords, so it could be something unknown, and perhaps worth fighting. She knew that she could destroy most types of things, but what if they came up with something new that would put up a real fight? Wouldn't that be great? After careful consideration, Naksha pointed to the Lich Lords. You and Kara specialize in nullifying magic. I know that it might not be the most glamorous fight when you don't let them do much of anything, but going where we are the most able leaves others free to deal with the rest of the challenges, where they might also be the most able. So, we should take out the Lich Lords as quickly as possible in the morning, and then wait for other magic users to present themselves for culling. She explained. Tessa shrugged. The undead were undead, and they were at war with them all. The Red Dragon didn't care which target they chose, only that it was strategically important, and against the enemy, not civilians. Alright then, if there are no objections, we can take on the Lich Lord horde in the morning, and then either camp out near the border or return here again for the evening. Dana smiled. Why don't we have Lady Ray make us a tree fort again? We haven't done one of those in a while now, and it would keep us near the border, where we would be on hand if there were unexpected enemies. Chapter 894. Head in the game. A tree fort sounded great to everyone. They were comfortable to sleep in, and being near the lines would help keep them in the right frame of mind. Being here in the capital at night removed the sense of danger and urgency, allowing them to talk about picking targets at random instead of defending areas of land. Fighting was fighting, in a way, but the determination to protect could make all the difference when it came down to morale and combat results. If they knew nothing about the area and its inhabitants, they were unlikely to fight as hard as they could. That sort of casual approach to defense would make the locals fight that much harder when something unexpected happened, and there were too few forces nearby. As much as they might like to think that they were giving it their all in battle, if they were only showing up to fight and then leaving, they were never going to have that sense of commitment that would drive them to the greatest feats. It wasn't proven that those were what helped you advance the fastest, but there was strong evidence that harder fights were more likely to help break a bottleneck if you were at one. Logically, the two should be related. One last night in the guild house, catching up on work while they were away, and quietly listening to the buzz of the city, then they would leave at dawn. Many of the people were talking about the fights at the Bomgan border, as so many of the troops had been mobilized to help deal with it, but the reason for the attacks wasn't clear. The undead raided, pillaged, and were a general blight to the world. But they were rarely organized across more than a single group. Now, there were multiple groups attacking at the same time, and no obvious reason for it. That alone was enough to be concerning. They had just suffered an attack by the pirate fleet, but now they were facing intense attacks from the undead horde that lived inland? Did something happen to change the undead? Or did something happen in Drod that was drawing them to the demon nation? That was the great concern of many. The pirate attacks had been increasing for most of a year before the invasion attempt, affecting shipment lanes and travel times, when the goods did finally make it to their destinations. So, it wasn't as if the extra activity came out of nowhere, just that it now had a focus, and they couldn't see a reason that they had been picked. First thing in the morning, Carl put on the leather over silk armored pants and jacket that Ray had made for him. Not that he really needed the extra armor. Carl suspected that she had made him a new set so that he wasn't always wearing a skill instead of smelling like her silk. When he was in battle, the armor skill would be in place, so most of the time the fact there was armor under it wouldn't change much. But it made Ray happy to have everyone in her armor, and wielding Carl's weapons. Except Carl himself, who was still using the Blade of Champions and the Haint Claw. Both of the items were artifact-grade weapons, and both were perfectly suited to his skills, so there was no real reason for him to change to something that he had made himself. However, he did have a number of elemental gems in his armor set for skill power, mana storage, and physical enhancement. Those were too good to miss out on, and he couldn't always rely on Rampage to increase his damage enough to put him above his opponents in direct output without exhausting himself. Naksha, will you be airborne again today? Or will you be on the ground with the other clerics? Carl asked as the group prepared to leave. Unless I am needed on the ground, I will be in the air with Hawk. It's safer to have two flying targets so that the enemy can't focus on one of us without being vulnerable to the other. We don't know if there will be a full legion there today, so there may or may not be air support. The Black Dragon's reasoning was solid. The safety in numbers mattered, and she didn't have any abilities that needed her to remain within a short range of the target, other than her attack abilities, which would be much more useful in dragon form. Did anyone else have a request for changes in the deployment? If not, I will open the separate space and we can travel to the battlefield. Nobody raised any concerns, so Carl opened the way to the tiny world and let them all in. Then he opened a portal to their last battle location, which was a short flight from where they were expecting to find the group of Lich Lords this morning. At least for Hawk it was, I see the defenders in the distance. Should we go greet them and let them know that we will be here? Our group is a little odd. Hawk suggested. That would be for the best. Who knows how they might react when we show up. We don't want them thinking that there are enraged beasts defending their territory here. Those would be a threat to both sides, and the reaction might be unexpected. Carl agreed. Far below, The commander of the 19th Border Legion watched the Ghostfire Thunderbird descending with a cat demon on his back. That was one of the most insane combinations that he had seen in his life, but the man was waving at him and the bird wasn't attacking, so he was willing to take it as a good sign. Commander, I have brought a team to assist in the battle with the Lich Lords. I am a beast master, so don't mind the species diversity, but I also have dragon clerics and a black dragon with my team, as well as a mage and a werbear berserker, Carl declared the moment that he landed. What is your team's specialty? Or are you a new group for the border war? The Legion commander asked. Myself plus one other anti-magic specialist, then 2 flying artillery. The Thunderbird and the Dragon. The others are a short-range combat unit, with a green dragon cleric specializing in area healing. I recommend putting them near the center of the line, where troops can be brought to the healing tree for recovery. The commander smiled. Glad to have you, then. Might I ask, where are these others you speak of? Chapter 895. Picking on the Mages. Carl opened the tiny world and let the others out, which brought a startled noise from the commander. So, you fly to the battle, then bring the others in with a portal. Very efficient for moving long distances. How long will you remain in the region? He asked. As long as there are appropriate targets for us. If you are quiet in this zone for the day, we will likely move to an active battlefield so that we can make the most of our presence along the line while we are here. You have a region to defend, but not every portion of the border will see action every day. The commander nodded. Excellent news. The Lich Lords are behind their army, with 10 kilometers distance between us. You said that you specialize in that sort of thing, so I will have you join Delta Force for the morning, and move with them when the enemy has engaged. They are our Overlord rank specialists, and I will be dealing with any unexpected totems, as well as unit organization. Wonderful. I saw them from the sky on my way in, and I didn't sense any totems with them, but you can never be too careful. Lotus grabbed Dana and split off to join the healing group, a motley bunch of trollish shamans who were setting up cots and some sort of shrine that Carl couldn't identify. That was better than he had feared. Many demonic armies didn't have proper healers, but the trolls were easy to get along with, and as soon as Lotus and Dana had arrived, they began adding their personal touch to the shrine, which turned out to be no shrine at all. They were arranging skewers in advance so that they had fried fish to snack on during the battle. Dana probably wouldn't stay with them for the whole battle, but she normally sent her golems forward to fight, while she kept the epic guard near her toward the back of the battle, keeping the enemy from getting too close to the healers. Thor and Tessa were with Ophelia, not far from where Lotus was setting up for her healing tree performance, so Carl left to go join the Delta Force team, as the commander had named his elite unit. Greetings, gentlemen and ladies. My name is Carl and this is Kara. Oh, we have Remy with us as well. Are you sure you didn't want to go with the healers and mages this time? Carl began. Remy nodded. I can fight and heal, so we will join your team this time. Carl smiled. Alright, Remy here is a shaman queen, so she has some healing abilities, as well as her fighting skills and her bodyguards. The totems have a limited range, so if you're injured, retreat in her direction. Kara is an anti-magic specialist, so she will be doing her best to stop the larger spells from the Lich Lord group. The army today wasn't made up of all skeletons. There were ghouls, wights and zombies as well, representing the differing specialties of the various leaders present. Lich Lords were normally among the hardest undead to deal with, as unlike so many other species, they were the elites of their magical disciplines before their death. A vampire could have come from anyone, zombies and skeletons were morons, but a Lich Lord could only come from an incredibly powerful mage, and retain their intellect. However, they weren't all military geniuses even if they were brilliant mages. That was proven true the moment that the army approached, and Carl realized that the wights and the ghouls were at the front, leading the charge. It should have been the zombies and skeletons to soak up the first wave of damage, so that the more capable fighters could face less cohesive defensive lines. But the extra intelligence had them charging forward, while the shambling hordes lumbered along behind them, just trying to keep up. Battle strategy appeared to be the last thing that the Lich Lords were concerned with, and they were simply driving the undead forward, intending to use the weight of a massive numbers advantage to deal with the defenders. The 5 Lich Lords would be able to not only bring their undead back to life, but turn the defeated demons into undead to replace the ones that they had lost, potentially increasing their army with every battle. For that purpose, they had brought along a small group of supply wagons holding the relics that the undead army was tied to. Defeated skeletons could easily be raised again, wights reformed from their essence, leaving only the ghouls and zombies susceptible to permanent mutilation. But even if they were defeated in that way, they could still return as skeletons, as a blow to the head was not enough to keep the animated bone monsters from reforming, as long as the source of their power remained intact. Once the armies are fully engaged, we will move to take on the Lich Lords. We don't want them turning the army away to surround us, so don't jump the start. The leader of the Special Forces team, a burnt orange demon with 4 wings and a bird's head, warned. How should I address you? Your nameplate is hidden. Carl asked. The demon smiled. I am an old man, though I suppose not everyone is good at guessing ages. I was born long before the system started to reactivate, so I don't have an interface of my own. But you can call me Delta. Delta Force. Carl had assumed that was a phonetic thing for the fourth group in a series, but it turned out to be someone's name. Perhaps they could fix the demon's system status after the battle. If he could lead a strike force as he was certainly not a weak opponent, and his species was well known for their magical abilities. Carl heard the demons cheer as Tessa used Holy Weapon as a group spell, enhancing their blades and spears with holy damage that would tear through the undead like butter. From Thor's back, she made a brilliant red target, standing over the demonic army like a figurehead, and glowing with holy power that was anathema to all things unliving. But she was also behind the lines, protected from the initial charge, which would surely be headed directly for her once the Lich Lords realized that she was a dragon. Cleric. Hawk, as soon as the two sides make contact, you can lead Naksha down into battle. Happy hunting, Carl announced as the charging undead reached the 50-meter mark from the defenders. Happy hunting. Bring me back something shiny. Chapter 896. Teamwork makes the Kara work. The two sides crashed in a flurry of blades, and holy light shone from all over the battlefield as the enchanted weapons activated on contact with the undead. That immediately caught the attention of the Lich Lords, and they began to glow with power as they ordered their troops to adjust and target the Red Dragon Cleric. But that was not to be. As soon as the undead horde began to shift attack angles, Hawk and Naksha descended from the sky to drown the army in fire and a thick black smoke. The power of the god of death seemed to call to them, and the undead visible began to disintegrate around the edges under the onslaught, even while the animating magic of the Lich Lords regenerated the damage done to them. With the two sides now fully engaged, Delta ordered his troops forward, and the team began to circle the battlefield. Take the short route and take point. Keep them from casting while we charge. Delta quietly ordered, hoping that Carl wasn't joking about being an anti-magic specialist. Kara leapt from Carl's shoulder, and Remy moved beside him as Carl used Gravity Slam to toss the few intervening undead out of the way as he approached the Lich Lords. Unfortunately, one or more of them was aware of the horrors of a winged void badger on a mission, and all five turned their focus to Kara, who was ready to dive at them. Both Carl and the badger focused their efforts to nullify the spells, while a disintegration-based shell around Kara absorbed the worst of the other three attacks. Nothing hit her hard enough to cause actual damage, but it bought them some time, and before they were ready to cast again, Carl and Remy would be in melee range. The ground turned marshy under their feet as Remy activated the Naga Swamp, drawing the attention of the undead leaders only an instant before her bodyguards appeared behind them. Then Carl called on the Naga bodyguards, as well as a pair of dire bear golems, to attack from the front as the Delta team charged through the swamp. Rather, half of the team charged through the swamp, and the other half simply flew over it, avoiding the delays of the swamp's soft ground. There didn't appear to be any sort of power difference between the five Lich Lords, which didn't seem right to Carl. Even if they had advanced at the same time, there should be some sort of difference. So, his first thought when his attack was blocked with a casual wave of the Lich Lord's hand was that they were all sharing a power source. This wasn't a group of regular overlords, it was a situation more like his own, where multiple powerful beings were linked together, and the ones that were in the most trouble were able to draw on the reserves of the others to save themselves. That meant that breaking their barriers would mean breaking all five at once, as trying to target down a single Lich would only result in them using the power of the others to defend, leaving four on the offensive side. Fortunately, they had an entire team coming to them, and the Lich Lords would all be engaged at once, but the threat of one of them using an overpowered attack and taking out a demon in a single strike was very real. Of course, there was a chance that they could also do that to Carl or one of his teammates, but with Void Body active on the team, the chances were lower that it would work. Instead of engaging, Carl stayed back from the battle and let the summons do the heavy work, while he focused on assisting Kara in nullifying any attack that felt like it carried a dangerous level of power. But with 5 Lich Lords and only 2 of them, it was proving impossible to get them all. Kara nullified an overpowered fireball, then had to dodge as Carl took out an area spell that was raising skeletal hands from the swamp, but couldn't cast fast enough to deal with the unholy fire that another of the undead mages sent her way. Their casting speed was ridiculously fast to begin with, and for the first few seconds, their barriers were having no issues keeping the melee warriors at bay. That changed quickly when Delta began to cast some sort of channeled incantation. The barrier around them began to destabilize, first letting bits of attack abilities through, then failing entirely. The Lich Lords tried desperately to bring it back up, but with Kara and Carl working together, the process was proving impossible. They had to use all 5 of them to make it as strong as needed, as the effects of Rampage were beginning to stack up, and the damage done by each strike of the bodyguards was enough to take down a lesser barrier with every blow. The Naga were fighting seriously, with grim expressions on their serpentine faces, while the Lamia bodyguards that Carl summoned were clearly smirking at the Lich Lords, even as they rapidly hurled spells at them. They were holding back, limiting their output as the effect of Rampage began to near its time-limited peak, and Carl didn't have to guess why. Once the barriers on the Lich Lords fell completely, they would exert as much pressure as they could, and force the undead to buckle so that the demonic special forces team could finish them off. Only, the Lich Lords did not appear to be weakening. Like Carl and his team, their mana reserves seemed to be limitless, and while they were taking damage without their primary barrier, they were not showing any signs of reducing their mana usage to conserve energy, even when they were fighting 5 opponents at a time. They have a mana battery here somewhere. It must be in the wagons. Delta shouted to Carl as the battle began to drag on, and the demons were beginning to reduce the frequency of their attacks to save stamina. Go take care of it. I will hold them here while you deal with whatever traps and trickery they have in store. Carl insisted. Hawk, bring Naksha and find the mana battery that the undead are using. Destroy it if you can. We're having trouble doing any real damage to them. If we can't destroy their power source, they're going to escape once they lose their armies. Carl quietly instructed. With 5 Lich Lords, there was no way that none of them knew Portal or a related escape spell. Chapter 897. Protect the wagons. The moment that Hawk and Naksha headed for the wagons, the undead changed their tactics. They immediately stopped pushing forward, and all 5 Lich Lords moved to encircle the small supply convoy in a defensive perimeter. That alone would have made it incredibly obvious what the source of their unusually potent power was, even if someone hadn't already guessed, but it raised the more important question of what could they do about it. Carl and Kara had managed to keep the Lich Lords from bringing their area barrier back online, but Hawk was having no luck trying to get attack spells into the convoy that they were defending. We need to learn the trick to their casting speed. I want to be able to throw spells that fast. Remy noted as she adjusted the position of her totems. If anyone can figure it out, it's you. But maybe we will get lucky and they'll have a grimoire or something on them and you can stock up on spells after we win this fight. Carl suggested. Remy began plotting new and innovative ways to make the Lich Lords vanish without destroying the caravan, just in case there were good things in there to loot. But that was not actually too difficult, wasn't it? Kara. Remy began. On it. Butterfly, a little help. Kara vanished and Carl doubled down on the counter spells so that the Lich Lords didn't gain any headway while the Void Badger did what she did best. For a moment, everything was coated in a black mist as Naksha passed overhead and unleashed her breath weapon on the Lich Lords. That was Kara's cue to move. Everyone was distracted and she was invisible, so she went directly for the core of the Lich Lords formation, aiming for the supply wagons. The undead were giving everything to protect them, even calling back their armies to defeat the Special Forces group. But the stealthy badger simply pranced past their defenses and began searching for the treasures. Food? Why do they need food? They're all dead. Spare bones, bodies, weapons. Oh, there we go, Kara narrated as she searched. The final wagon contained a large glowing gem locked within a metal box that had swung open the moment that Kara used Nullify on the lock. Yank! Yank! Carl, it won't move. I can't even take the full wagon into my space. Kara complained. Then I guess we just have to deal with the undead first. Unless you're willing to blow it up. Kara considered her options for a half second. On one hand, a huge shiny stone. On the other hand, it was a stone that she couldn't keep. Void Blast solved that dilemma rather easily. The wagon vanished in a mushroom cloud of stored energy and Kara retreated to her space for a half second to avoid being caught in the epicenter of her handiwork. The metaphysical blast shook Carl's brain and dropped most of the nearby demons to their knees. Even Remy was dizzy from the blast. But standing right next to the destruction, the Lich Lords were completely out of it for the last half second of their lives before Hawk and Naksha swooped in to blast them to pieces. However, luck was not on their side today, and the moment that the Lich Lords' power failed, the bodies of the undead mages faded from sight, returning to whatever safe point they had designated as their fallout shelter in the event of an untimely death. Worse, the undead horde that they had brought were still fighting, even if it was mindlessly without the Lich Lords there to guide them. The plus side was that without guidance, Thor and Tessa were absolutely wrecking the zombie horde in a rolling wave of crushing gravity and holy lightning. Using Blockade, one of Thor's new racial abilities, with Gravity Slam and Tessa's spear made for a brutal charging attack. The Gravity Slam knocked everything over, then the wall of lightning swept them all up and pushed them forward in front of Thor, while Tessa launched holy spears into anything that looked like it might still move. With that tactic, they were scooping up entire segments of the undead army and pushing through them like a bulldozer with its blade down, driving forward and depositing the mulched bodies to the side. Well, that's not terrifying at all. Delta joked as he saw the tactic that the massive behemoth was using. Just wait until he realizes that he can use it like a flapper wheel and tilt the walls down on them to crush them as he passes by. Carl agreed. Thor laughed in Carl's head. We tried that. The undead just get pounded into the ground and then dig themselves back out. That was something that Carl should have expected. They were Overlord-ranked undead. Expecting them to be less durable than compacted grassland soil was a bit too optimistic. The new weapons appeared to be a big hit with everyone in the group, and even Remy was enjoying her newfound bonuses even if she wasn't going all out with the area spells today. Just being able to keep up all her other spells at once, including both types of totems and a constant barrage of chain lightning, was enough to keep her happy now that she knew the undead weren't hiding any good stuff among the supply carts. She had collected the few remaining bits of the stone that Kara had destroyed, just in case they were useful, but nothing else in the whole supply caravan stood out to her. It appeared to be nothing but spare parts for making more undead. The army unit was forcing the undead into an ever-tightening circle as they crushed the disorganized force, and Carl simply watched and made mental notes as their years or decades of training showed him the most efficient way to completely surround a disorganized enemy. It was a work of art, and with Thor's bulwark holding one side, it was as good as driving them up against a cliff. The hapless undead couldn't even effectively damage the lightning wall, as without the Lich Lords to give them directions, the skeletons and zombies didn't think to use skills, and the smarter undead had been the first ones eliminated. Chapter 898, Environmentally Friendly. Once the undead were truly dead, the work of cleaning them up to prevent the spread of plagues or even the zombie virus to the surrounding ecosystem began. The worst thing that you could do in the minds of the soldiers was to fight a zombie in running water. The moment that you began to damage it, the undead creature would leak infected fluids into the water, and there was no telling what life form downstream might ingest that in enough concentration that it would turn them and begin an outbreak. Towns along the rivers had detection magic to ensure that nothing of the sort or any other magical toxin would make its way through their territories, but a zombie monster could spread the plague just as easily as a zombie farmer or dock worker. Fortunately, they were demons and they had plenty of fire magic to help them fully sanitize the area and eliminate the possibility of the virus spreading, as well as thorough sanitation procedures in place to ensure that none of the disease was passed on. That was made easier by Lotus, who had her 4 new totems spread out in a ring around her, expanding the effect of her Tree of Life form's healing aura. All they had to do was stand nearby for a while after they had cleaned themselves, and the effect would kill the zombie virus even if it was already starting to take root in their system. But with barriers up and fire magic at the ready, most of the soldiers didn't actually come into contact with the blood and could just burn it off themselves if they did. Once they were finished, Delta marshaled his troops and brought them to the command group, who were preparing to set camp for the evening and send out scouts. Carl nodded politely to the group's leaders. "We will remain in the area for a while in case there are more attacks coming. Would you like me to have the Thunderbird scout? Hawk has excellent eyesight even from thousands of meters in the air and won't have any trouble tracking the movement of other enemy forces in the region. We will take any and all help you can offer. Will you be staying with the unit? Or somewhere nearby?" the commander asked hopefully. Carl looked around the open grasslands. "I'm not certain. We usually prefer an elevated position to let the blood destruction spider make us a fort, but we can settle at ground level if necessary." The demon nodded in understanding. Sleeping on the ground wasn't anyone's favorite hobby. However, it was safer to have everyone together and close enough that they could all be behind a communal barrier to keep out any uninvited guests during the evening hours. Realistically, Carl didn't need to pick a tree to build a fort in. He had the tiny world and an entire underground city worth of tunnels there, plus the recreation of the guild house with a comfortable bed, silk sheets, and fresh air. That somewhat defeated the purpose of staying with the demon army though. They wanted the connection that being on the line would give them, so retreating to a separate space would be counterproductive. Well, for most of them. Remy was already in the alchemy lab of the tiny world and working on the potions that she had missed out on making while they traveled. Once the area was fully cleared and Hawk had reported that there was nothing within a 20-kilometer search radius, the army began to plan their evening camp location. One of the junior officers gestured off into the distance. "Why don't we move east to the village? They'll be happy to get the sales of bulk goods to the army, and the presence of a whole unit will give them some peace of mind. Things have been tense along the border with all these attacks, and public relations are important." The commander thought about it, then shook his head. "It's too close to the attack. They will only worry that we're hiding a threat. They must already know about the battle, and they will have seen the aftermath in the distance. If we go there now, they'll think that they are the next target. Set up a perimeter wall with the earth demons and make a fort. We will camp a kilometer toward the border away from the aftermath of the battle." The commander decided. "Leave some space for us. I will have my team set up a large tent for the evening. Then we will scout again in the morning." Carl insisted. The commander gestured to the junior officers, and within minutes, the demons were building a large perimeter wall in the distance. Ray quickly joined them to make a proper tent for her people with earth barrier posts to hang the hammocks from and double-layered silk cloth with a sticky inner layer to catch any sneaky sorts who might try to creep in to spy them. She didn't really think that any of the Drod army soldiers would be stupid enough to try to intrude on them, but a girl could dream. Just the potential of catching an attempted peeping Tom was enough reason for her to put in the extra work. Thur transformed back into humanoid form and Hawk returned to his space for the evening, but Kara decided to stay out and make the most of the hammock that Ray had made for her. Anyone who saw how happy she was, laying on her back, feet in the air, gently rocking herself in a hammock, would find it hard to argue with the strategy. But she was secretly hoping that if she was nearby and not in her space, she might be the first one to notice if someone tried to sneak into the tent. Once everyone was inside, the army unit set patrols around the outside of the stone barrier wall, and Carl noticed that there were no active defensive measures in place, just the one stone wall. Once it was created, it didn't give off an aura of magic at all, and that gave the whole unit a rather low-key presence. Much like a powerful monster pack, they simply existed in the plains. In a way, it was both more and less secure than Carl's usual preparations. There was no barrier active, but its absence made it less likely that anything would notice their presence in the first place. Chapter 899, Honest Soldiers. Ray watched carefully all night, but none of the demons seemed interested in coming creeping into the tent. Honest people were boring. So, first thing in the morning, she brought out some of the royal rank whale meat for the soldiers. They were stationed near the inland border, so they wouldn't have had a chance to get any of it when the whales arrived, and the meat would be a change for them where the boar monsters were everyday sorts of meals. There was a flying whale herd not long ago in Drod. Here, fry this up for the unit's breakfast. If there aren't any threats during the morning scouting, we will likely move along, so this might be the only chance to give it to you. She explained to the cook. Oh, flying whale? That will be a change. Let me find a nice spice combo for that, and I will save some for soup tomorrow. The cook agreed easily. The soldiers brought back meat regularly, and while whale was a different flavor set than usual, the unit's chef had enough spices to keep the soldiers from getting too bored with their meals. The smell of frying whale meat drew out the soldiers who were lingering in bed until the last minute, as well as Carl's team, who were enjoying the cool, dry air of a morning in the inner steps. It was more like home than the constant humid warmth of Drod, and a pleasant change for the team. Hawk took off to scout, hopeful that they would find something close enough for this unit to fight. Delta and his group were good and easy to work with. Fighting on a team with people you knew was better. They wouldn't do strange things, and they were already aware of the tricks that the Carl's team could pull. But when he got to search altitude, just below the cloud cover, he found that there wasn't anything for hundreds of kilometers. He could see multiple smaller villages, 2 other army units, and a river. But no undead or any other obvious threats. That wasn't what he was hoping for. There was a whole invasion going on, but there were thousands of kilometers of border, and he couldn't wander too far, or they would have to find a new group to work with. Even as far as he had scouted today, they would have to switch units if the attack was on the outside edges of his range. Nothing to attack. But there is a village not far away full of orcs. Maybe they want some stuff. Hawk suggested. Not a terrible idea. The orcs should at least be entertaining, since we can't find anything to fight. Take a tour closer to the border and see if they are just staging for an attack in a few days, and we will prepare to move to the village when we get your report. Carl agreed. Hawk flew for another half-hour, making a serpentine pattern into the territory of the undead. I found their city. All the undead are here. So many zombies. Just zombies everywhere. The city has vampires and some living things, but there are at least 3 cities worth of zombies outside. Carl mentally calculated where Hawk was, as it was certain that the army would know the location of the cities, and it was important that they knew what one was preparing for an invasion. So he went looking for the unit commander to explain the situation. Almost directly north of us, across the border of the dead zone, there is a city half the size of Drod, full of undead. Hawk says that there is a zombie horde 3 times that city's population gathered and waiting for something. Carl explained. The commander took out a map and gestured at a city marking. That is called Ekbor. It's the only city of that size in the direction you indicated. It's not far from the border, but if they start to march, they'll only be 2 days to Bach, and there are 10,000 people there. I will send a message to have the units in the area send a scout to verify the numbers. But you're saying that there should be hundreds of thousands of undead gathered outside the city? He asked. Carl nodded. That's what Hawk reports. You can verify it as he relates the number of undead outside the city to the number of people inside the city. But it should be close enough if you know how many are in the city. The demon focused for a moment and sent a system message to someone, then frowned. Military intelligence already knew, they just didn't relay it as it's not in our zone. I still don't know what they're planning to do about that. But so many zombies is more than the border force will be able to deal with. Even if the Leg Regiment finished their engagement today, it might not be enough to deal with that many zombies. Honestly, what I'm more worried about is them using portals to send them somewhere else. Sure, they're gathered at the border now. But if they've got necromancers and lich lords with them, they don't have to just march across the plains. They can attack wherever they want. The cities all have barriers over them to prevent unwanted portals, but a whole army appearing just outside of town isn't any less dangerous. The commander rubbed his temples, then took out a flask from his inventory and took a long swill. There is a good reason why I don't think too hard about all the possibilities. It's best to just focus on what is going on around us and leave the rest to someone else. For all we know, this could be one huge feint. Gathering the armies at our border makes everyone else watching the undead think that they're about to invade Drod. But they could be planning to use portals to hit Unzatherb, Gabel, or Nababin. Sending a whole fleet across the channel to the last 2 is implausible on the scale they would need. But portals would work just fine. Chapter 900, Tactical Decisions. Carl nodded in understanding. Sending 300,000 zombies somewhere to attack would be a logistical nightmare, even though they didn't need to eat or sleep. With only 2 nations bordering the undead kingdom of Bomgan and 2 more immediately across the channel, the options were limited, but a ground invasion was not a foregone conclusion. Say, do you know if there is a reason for this surge in violence from the undead? They don't appear to be overcrowded within their nation. In fact, with so few monsters, there is a lot of open space for them. Did something happen that set them off? Like turning away the attack on Drod City? Carl asked. That could be part of it, but they have always been aggressively expansionist. I believe it's mostly the result of the necromancers and their death cult. The magic invades and corrupts their souls. It makes them hate all forms of life and traps them somewhere between life and death, tethered to the netherworld by their own dark magic, until one day they become the undead themselves. They're a true nuisance, and they've been driven out of almost everywhere in the world. Even the dark elves of the underworld disdain them and treat them as slaves. So, being on the border of their last remaining territory means suffering their attacks every time that they build up enough of a force to spread their influence a little further. The commander's tone was somber and resigned. It wasn't something that anyone could change, and Drod didn't have enough of a military force to completely wipe out the entire nation of Bomgan if that was even possible. So many of the powerful undead had ways to resurrect themselves if their body was destroyed that the prospect of completely eliminating them was laughable. Carl shrugged. Then I guess that all we can do is wait to see what happens. If there are no threats for the day, I was thinking of taking my team to the nearest village to trade with them. There is always something in demand in a farming village, and we are a crafting guild. The big demon smiled. They'll be happy to see you. The trade caravans have been sparse the past few months. They don't want to take the risk to come this close to the border with all the unrest, while the villages closer to the coast are getting larger and demanding more of their goods. While Carl talked to the commander, the others packed up the tent and then passed it to Delta and his team. They would appreciate the hammocks, and the tent could be assembled with earth magic poles, so there was no complex process involved. The rest of the unit was clearly envious that not only were they getting a fancy new tent designed to set up in seconds with a full unit worth of hammocks to keep them up off the ground, but it was Overlord-ranked monster silk. And even if the camp came under attack, it would be able to take a hit or two, and they wouldn't have to worry as much about being ambushed in their sleep. Hawk continued his scouting passes as the camp's defensive wall was retracted, and they prepared to go on patrol again. Staying in one spot made it too easy for the enemy to avoid them or alter deployments to counter their numbers. So, they patrolled in erratic pattern, making their location less predictable even though their territories were somewhat fixed. The ladies all climbed up on Thor's back after he transformed back into his four-legged behemoth form. Even Ray was riding with him today while the rest of the beasts returned to their space, except Remy, who was in the tiny world alchemy labs making stock for the shop. They were still close enough to access the guild bank so she could transfer materials to the other alchemists from her space where most of them were growing. Plus, she could bring over potions they had put in stock so they could treat themselves as a traveling branch of the shop when they visited. Making their way to the village was simple enough. It was only half an hour away, with Thor walking and Carl jogging beside him. Hawk was scouting the region and didn't see anything, but Carl didn't want to get tangled in a mass of limbs if there was a sudden attack. But he knew that Thor would look after everyone, so there wasn't any risk to letting them all ride. The village itself was like none that Carl had come across before. Not only was it surrounded by a high wall, but they had also dug a moat and filled it with sharp metal spikes and oil, a flaming barricade should an undead horde approach their home. There were also endless fields in the kilometers surrounding the farms, but no farmhouses. There were outbuildings, storage sheds, and so on, but not a single house to be seen. Logically, they must all live in the village's protective walls and only come out to work. But that seemed like a rather extreme living situation even this close to the border. But once they got through the gate, things began to make sense. The orcs didn't live in traditional family homes the way that you would expect from the word village. Instead, there were a number of long barracks-style houses and dozens of other facilities within the walls, and everyone was going about their day as usual. As usual if it were a traveling orc camp. Demon, what brings you here in this time of strife? An aging orc with a notepad hanging from his hip asked as Carl led the group into the village. We were assisting the regiment with some undead, but there were no more close enough to be a threat for the day, so we thought we might come by and visit. We're a crafting guild and we've got a small group of dragon clerics with us if you should need anything, Carl explained. That got the orc's attention and he whistled for someone else to join them. A very large someone, Carl realized. The clan chief of the village was a monster of a man even by Orcish standards. Chapter 901, Chief Snakebite. Champion Carl, I am Sub-Chief Snakebite of the Bach clan. Welcome to our village. We follow the old ways, so there might not be much that we can trade between you and us. But it is a pleasure to meet you. The huger greeted them. I am certain that there is something, even if it's not what you expect. We have bone and wood runic items to help with crafting, mana storage, cleaning, creating water, and even improving luck with the opposite sex. Plus, the lovely ladies of the church are always willing to help your people keep their pantries stocked with their signature rice and beans. Carl offered. The chief smiled back at Carl. Now, that is something that we can all agree on. However, as we do not trade much, we also do not have much coin. From Thor's back, Naksha laughed. You know, we have a red dragon high priestess here, and I am reasonably certain that her goddess would be offended if we charged you for food when there is war at your doorstep. The black dragon insisted. Tessa nodded in agreement. Provisioning the civilian villages before an invasion was an important part of any war, and the red dragon god took a dim view of war profiteering. Or, at least she did when it came to non-combatants. The red dragon didn't mind at all if you got filthy rich making weapons for both sides of a righteous conflict. The ladies climbed down from Thor's back and he transformed back into a humanoid to better protect them and explore the town. Carl had noticed that he was becoming more and more protective of Tessa now that she had a fully scaled transformation, but she didn't seem to mind, so he wasn't going to say anything about it. Would you like us to fill a cellar for you? Or do you perhaps have a storage silo? Tessa asked. You can make that much? The chief replied, startled at her request. I am a monarch-ranked high priestess. I can make enough to feed an entire army with every casting. It's not uncommon for all of a dragon army's vegetable-based foods to be magically created. Only meat needs to be hunted. Tessa explained. Chieftain Snakebite patted her on the shoulder, then gestured to a tall, round building off to his left. That granary is empty. We can clean it out to prepare it for your dry food, and then the people of the village will have real cause to celebrate. With all these attacks across the border, there is a high chance of blight destroying the crops, and we've already lost much of our livestock. The attacks last week passed by us, and a group of revenants broke off to attack the cattle in the night, he explained. Naksha frowned. Revenants were a nasty sort of creature, and the black dragons killed them on sight. They weren't technically undead, but living creatures whose souls had been ripped out, trapping them halfway between life and death, driven insane by the missing piece of themselves and ravenously hungry, trying to fill the void where their soul should be. But worse, they often retained some of the skills and powers of their initial species. That made them among the most dangerous residents of Bomgan, and an atrocity that the necromancers often committed upon fallen villages. After all, why would they sacrifice their own to make revenants when they could capture villagers and rely on the unholy magic to turn them into soldiers? But if they were using revenants, the battles against the Bomgan invaders took on a whole new level of disturbing. With every village overrun, they would have undead much stronger than the usual zombies and skeletons. The orcs were quickly sweeping out the grain bin and putting down a ground cloth made of higher-grade cloth that the average rodent couldn't chew through to line the bin and keep unwanted occupants away from the food. Once everything was prepped, Tessa climbed the bin and secured the top of the cloth at the ceiling vent hatch. Then she began channeling the creation spell and slowly filling the large round building with dry food. Over the course of the next 5 minutes, the wooden building creaked and groaned softly as it was loaded, and then Tessa finally dropped the top of the cloth and closed the top vent that she was loading through. In the Golden Dragon Nation, that would be the usual loading point for an auger, but the orcs didn't have anything of the sort, and instead they had a moving ramp for bulk wagons, which could be dumped down a chute into the bins. The setup looked pretty sketchy, but it must work, or they would have come up with something else by now. With under 1,000 orcs in the village, a whole bin full of food would last them months while under siege. Holding out that long would be much more difficult than keeping up the food supply, and if the undead were really outside that long, then the village would most likely be lost to the blight for many years afterwards. Carl looked around the village, then caught the chief's attention. Where's the village well? I am a rune master, and I can enchant it to always stay full of clean water. With a fresh supply of food and an upgraded well, the village should be stable until the situation with the enemy force buildup is settled. He asked. There is a well in the center of town. But we have rain barrels on all the buildings in case the undead try to poison the groundwater. Carl hadn't considered that. If that was the case, then he would just upgrade one of the storage tanks to always be at least half full. That way, it could still catch the rainwater, and a dry spell wouldn't run them out of water. He went off to do the work with the chief following him. What do your people want in exchange? This is a lot of benefit for my people, and you haven't made any requests yet. He whispered, not wanting to alarm his people if Carl's request was too much. Carl smiled. Well, we could consider it a favor, but I know that the orcs don't like dealing in favors. Instead, we can settle up today. The food is from the Red Dragon. I can't charge you for that during a war. But 2 gold coins worth of whatever you would like to trade for the water barrel upgrades is a fair price. Expensive now, but in the long term, they will pay for themselves. Chapter 902, Orcish Crafting. Chief Snakebite handed over 2 coins and shook Carl's hand. It's a pleasure doing business with you. Though I suspect that going to a village in person and doing upgrades isn't how things usually work. Carl laughed and took an item from the guild bank. This ring creates water. Up to 5 gallons at a time. That is our usual sales pitch for water creation. But as magical would a commander rank, carved and inscribed with runes, there is a lot of time that goes into its creation, and the price is about the same as me placing the runes on your water barrels. He explained. The chief nodded. You could sell a lot of those in Bach, the next major city, if you go to the main road. We're all part of the same clan, but they are more progressive after living among the demons so long. They buy and sell anything they can get. The farming communities don't really buy much. Well, we don't actually have much money anyhow, a true or doesn't need it. But I think that our people should have some items to trade with yours. Carl smiled. We can always use items made of quality materials, as our guild has runesmiths. Even if we get good wooden musical instruments or tools, we can upgrade them with magical effects and resell them. It's not a high-dollar trade, but what your people will want isn't all that expensive either. Trading them for items that help their crafting or store mana so they can work longer should be fine even by your traditions, right? The massive or nodded slowly. That should be fine. It's not fighting, just household help. Our villagers make musical instruments if your people are interested. Flutes and drums mostly. They're the best for Orcish war and working songs. That could be an interesting addition to the store. Limited edition Orcish war drums with magical effects would intrigue many of the purchasers, and they wouldn't be considered actual combat items by the Drod Lord's rules. Chief Snakebite passed the word around the village, and soon after they started to come out with their trade goods. Most were wood, some were carved from bones, and the drums had well-cured monster leather heads on them. The craftsmanship was extremely impressive even if they had no real adornment or carving on them. Instead, they were perfectly fitted, properly tuned, and the various types of pan flutes that they produced were similarly well-fitted. An old orc came up beside Carl with a smile on his face and a smoldering tobacco pipe between his teeth. "You know you're not leaving any time soon now that you've had them bring the instruments out," he muttered as he leaned against the wall of a nearby building. Carl nodded. "I rather suspected that when the chief said your village makes instruments. You can't just show something like that to a green dragon cleric and then leave. She would never stand for it even if we were in a hurry. But there weren't any undead close enough to be a threat today, and I still have one team member scouting up above. So there's no harm if we spend a day listening to stories and songs." In fact, there weren't many things that he could have suggested that would have made Lotus happier than telling her that they were going to spend a whole day singing and eating before purchasing a bunch of instruments to send back to the shop. The bards in Drod City would be happy to see the new additions to the market, Carl presumed, but mostly it was just to help the orcs relax for a day. They were constantly under threat here, and large portions of their crops had been repeatedly destroyed. So, a granary full of supplies and a day of leisure would do them a world of good. Every adult orc was a combatant when they were threatened. So, the fact that they were hiding behind a sturdy wall was strategic, not cowardly. They all could and would fight against the invaders, so they had surely earned a day of rest. Or perhaps, too, the way that they were going through barrels of a potent wine that the orcs called grog. Or perhaps it was a fruit-infused rum. It was hard to tell with the potency level that it had. But as the day wore on and more of the villagers finished their work for the day, the party only increased. It even got to the point where the singing and war drums were enough to bring scouts from the nearby military units to see if something had happened. They sang of battles past. They sang of bumper crops and lean years as nomads after crops failed. Then, as the sun was setting, they sang of the one true dream of the orc clans: to recover the lost dragon scale and nurture the system back to full activation. In Hawk's space, Carl could see that the fragment of dragon scale that they had was reacting, glowing a bit more brightly golden but still looking tarnished and depleted. Perhaps the goal of the orcs wouldn't be possible with the world dragon scale fragmented, but the fragment that was with Carl's team was beginning to awaken to their devotion and the magic of the orcs' music. Well, after dark, the party was still in full swing, and the sound of drums carried across the grasslands, telling the world that the orcs were not afraid of a fight. A fight that the undead were glad to give them. The forward scouts of the Bomgan force heard the Orcish war drums and began to move toward the village, drawn by the challenge sent out by the villagers. So, it was well after midnight when Ray was the first to discover that the undead were sending troops through portals into Drod. She transformed into her humanoid form and went to the town square to get everyone's attention. "The undead have heard our challenge and they are coming," she shouted, while the entire village filled with cheers. Orcs loved a good fight. Drunk orcs really loved a good fight. Chapter 903, Follow Ray's Lead. The orcs took Ray's words as gospel truth and fired magical flares up into the sky, lighting up the portals and the incoming army. The locals were staggering and laughing as they ran to grab weapons and don armor, but the children were tasked to stay by Lotus. Not for their safety, or at least not entirely. Their job was to keep up the songs so that the party didn't have to end while the adults fought a glorious night battle. Remy came out to confer with the village shaman and her assistant, then began preparing large spells to handle the threat. Instead of remaining inside the city walls and casting out, Remy had transformed into spirit snake form with the decrepit old orc shaman on her back so they could both see what was going on. The orcs were up on the wall, and Lotus had the perfect spell for this situation. Field of Vines was primarily an entanglement ability. But she could just make the vines perfectly straight and stiff while the orcs cut them off to hurl them as spears toward the undead. The vines regrew instantly as the Tree of Life appeared in the middle of the village, and Tessa mounted Thor, ready to leap over the wall the moment that the charge was sounded. Staggering drunk and from 100 meters away, the orcs were missing far more throws than they hit, but they were certainly having fun competing for kills as they laughed. Carl was a bit more pragmatic and much more sober, so he took out his bow and began to target everything that wasn't a zombie. The mindless undead were not the weakest in the army, but they were the least threatening if the leadership group was eliminated. So far, the only thing that had come through the portals was a horde of zombies and a few demonic necromancers who had been no match for the might of Void Blast on Carl's arrows. It made for a chaotic situation outside the walls as the zombies were drawn to the signs of life, but they were left without guidance on what might be an important target. Then Kara realized that there was a better way to annoy the undead. Sister Remy, cast Apocalypse through all the portals and see who comes out to play. She insisted. She was circling over the battlefield waiting for someone to play with, but they weren't sending anyone. The shambling horde was almost to the town walls now, and more of the spears were hitting their targets, leaving a swathe of undead corpses in the fields as the horde approached. Naksha unleashed a wall of her black mist breath weapon, which caused the undead who entered to simply crumple to the ground, lifeless. In the dark, the zombies didn't even know that they were walking into danger. Chief Snakebite stood beside Carl, hurling spears made of lotus vines, and laughed as Thor created a coating of ice along the ground with blockade, and the undead began to slip and stumble. It was like they were staging a comedy show, enraged but completely incapable of making it to the city across the ice. Then the amused behemoth created a second wall above them and smashed the undead between the two walls. The barriers shattered as the undead lashed out the moment they sensed danger. But hundreds were crushed, and the aftermath left giant boulders of ice in the field that the zombies had to navigate around. Then Ray joined the battle with blood destruction, and explosions rocked the battlefield, shredding zombies while sending a mist of filthy blood into the sky. The flaming vortexes of a hellstorm easily cleaned the worst of the mess as Hawk passed by and left presents before bombarding the newest arrivals to the region. The sound of the drums was pulling more and more undead toward the village, faster than the combined efforts of the villagers, and even Carl's team's area attacks were taking them out. But still, there were no signs of leadership other than the handful of necromancers that Kara and Ray had killed. Even having Remy cast Apocalypse through the portals hadn't drawn out anything fun. Chief Snakebite looked over the battlefield as a fresh round of flares went up, accompanied by fireworks. Do you think that they realized that it was a trap? He asked idly, then took a long swig of grog. Carl shrugged. It seems like it. Either that or they simply don't want to send any more troops to us. It looked like they were building up for something big, and we know they use portals to attack, so it could be anywhere. The chieftain laughed and tossed another spear out into the horde, impaling a zombie's forehead. The zombie horde was almost to the moat now, though Thor was likely to drive them back with blockade so that they would be properly clustered for the fire spells to incinerate them. Zombies burned especially well, especially under the effects of ghost fire. The creatures didn't have a soul to damage, but the flames seemed to burn through the link that the undead had to this world, destabilizing them long before their bodies were charred to the point of destruction. The eerie quiet of the battlefield took some getting used to, though. The war drums continued, and occasional whoops of celebration among the villagers could be heard. But the undead horde didn't make a sound as they approached. Nothing when they were caught in the barriers, and only the vague crackling of fire in the distance as they died. That began to change when the undead began to send different troops through the portals. Wave upon wave of zombies gave way to screeching banshees, insane revenants, and fast-moving ghouls which kept stopping to pick through the zombie corpses on their way forward. Chief Snakebite chuckled and took another swig of the grog. Well, here we go, boys. I hope that you have a way to deal with banshees because it might be game over for us. He muttered. Carl chuckled as Ray ripped the first one apart, leaving nothing but ethereal mist floating in the air. Then, the presence of another attracted the hellstorm vortexes which lit the entirely soul-based undead on fire in the most peculiar way, burning in an incorporeal way that didn't affect the undead around it and couldn't be put out. I think we might still have a shot. Chapter 904, Totems Lead the Force. The revenants and the ghouls were nothing like the zombie horde. Not only were they much faster and stronger, they were also vaguely intelligent. They didn't mindlessly lumber forward into traps or into Thor's lightning zone. They were smart enough to go around the visibly dangerous areas at the very least. Plus, they had good enough senses that they did at least attempt to defend themselves against the thrown spears. The silent battlefield became suddenly deafening as the revenants began to leap the moat and clash with the Orcish defenders. Blades met claws, or the corroded blades left from the revenants' past lives, and Lotus increased the radius of her Tree of Life effect to spill out over the moat. Like Thor's consecrated ground ability, simply standing in the aura was enough to damage and destroy the invaders, who were not all durable enough to endure. While there were countless overlords in the undead army, the majority of the numbers were made up of commander and royal rank undead. Those died in droves, but they provided cover for the stronger undead behind them. Chief Snakebite watched the flames sear the souls of the incorporeal undead away with a smile. You are a good man to have in a fight. Your team can fight with anything. Normally we need to call for more shamans when they send ghosts and haints. But how does a spider stab a specter? Carl just shrugged. She believes that it can be stabbed, so it can be stabbed. But she can also make herself incorporeal, so there might be some sort of interaction there. The orc nodded in satisfaction. That was good enough for him. Much of the world's magic worked because you believed that it did. At least, in the opinion of an Orcish chieftain that wasn't particularly magically inclined. The density of undead near them was increasing, so Carl began to use a larger radius explosion on the Void Blast, infused arrows to keep them off the walls. Remy and the local shaman were working together to create a flame storm around the village walls, a burning blizzard with stronger than usual winds. They had started at 20 meters from the moat so that it wouldn't affect the spear throwing, but even with Remy's power level, that wasn't enough to stop any but the weakest of enemies. If they wanted to do that, she was going to have to use Thunderstorm or Apocalypse. Naga Swamp was a great spell in the proper setting, but it only created a radius around Remy and the shape couldn't be altered. While defending a village, that would just make a mess. But today, the undead were surrounding the village, though no more portals had opened since the first batch, and repeated casts of Hellstorm through the existing portals only slowed the influx for a few minutes. Carl looked out over the battlefield and saw a pair of Overlord-ranked necromancers marching through the portals with an escort of Death Knights and a black-robed demon of some sort. No, that wasn't a demon, that was Ray, walking between them like she was part of their team, and the necromancers hadn't realized that their formation had been infiltrated yet. They stopped and raised their hands, bringing a wave of magic to the battlefield with a grand spell that was melting the flesh from the dead zombies and slowly raising them as skeletons. Ray watched silently as the necromancers got halfway through the spell. Then, with a dagger in either hand, she stabbed them both through the heart, killing them both instantly, which caused the half-formed skeletons to crumble to ash while the Death Knights stared at her in shock for a second, then kneeled before her. Did the spider just gain a retinue of Death Knights? Chieftain Snakebite asked. I think so. They look like they intend to follow her, don't they? Carl agreed. So much for loyalty among the undead. The chief laughed. The battlefield was suddenly full of burning embers as Remy decided that a full apocalypse was needed to deal with the number of undead on the battlefield. She was burning through an immense amount of magic to cast that at full output, but she was only going to need a few minutes to clear out the survivors of the invasion force, then she should have time to recover. She wasn't just burning through her own mana though. The Orcish shaman had some sort of magical device or spell that was feeding more mana to Remy, adding to the amount she was regenerating. The Naga Queen was loaded with mana storage and regeneration items, but for an Overlord-ranked area attack the size of a battlefield, no amount of mana regeneration would be able to keep up. Ray sent the Death Knights back through the portal with a wave of her hand, and Carl waited to see what she was up to. A few seconds later, the Death Knights escorted another trio of Overlord-ranked necromancers, all black-winged magic demons, onto the battlefield, where they were promptly assassinated by Ray. And people say that I'm the one with the best sense of humor. Kara joked. Whoever was still alive on the other side of those portals was going to lose their minds when they realized that they had just sent 3 overlords into a trap because they assumed that all the undead should be on their team. But for some reason the flow of undead had stopped. Ray went invisible and stuck her head through a portal to see what was going on. Oops, we broke the schedule. All the skeletons collapsed when I killed the last ones. I think that they know we're messing with them. Yeah, they definitely know that we're messing with them. They're totally sending a totem over here. Hey Kara, it's a bone dragon. Chieftain Snakebite was waiting for Carl to say something as the battle was rapidly ending. They are sending a totem-ranked bone dragon to come attack us. I think that if you can get to it before it starts flying, it should be a good fight. If not, I will have my team try to bring it back to the ground for you. Carl explained to the chief. Snakebite was the only totem-ranked fighter in the area, but just in case, Carl sent a message to Prince Stephen, the totem-ranked cleric. We are at the village led by Chief Snakebite near the border. There was an attack through portals tonight. Suspected totem-ranked bone dragon attack coming soon. If there is a military unit nearby, please advise. Carl messaged. Understood, there are 2 units already en route to your location, both with totem-ranked leaders. Well, Carl supposed they had made a bit of a spectacle in the dark with all this fire and the orcs constantly setting off fireworks along with the flares to illuminate the battlefield. Chapter 905, Delilah. Portals opened inside the village seconds later, and a whole team of dragon clerics in white robes came through, led by a red-robed totem-ranked woman. She looked like she should be in her mid-30s, a rather ageless motherly look that Carl was certain was a transformation spell. Snakebite simply waved at her, and the priestess nodded before turning to watch Tessa firing attacks from her perch on top of the behemoth's head, which was resting on the village wall so he could send spells out more easily. It also had the added benefit of encouraging the orcs to rub his head whenever he wiped out another wave of undead. The red dragon priestess seemed to glide through the air as she leapt from the center of the village to land beside Carl. It was similar to how Dana could walk on air but somewhat more graceful. Or, her legs might be strong enough that she could actually jump that far and she only used the magic to land more smoothly. Chieftain, Overlord. I got a message that there was a proper war going on here. It looks much more calm than expected. She greeted them. There is a totem-ranked bone dragon coming through the portal momentarily. The black-robed one is on our side and she's recruited the Death Knights to taunt the enemy. Carl explained. The priestess looked impressed and motioned for her retinue to join them. What was your plan to deal with it? I see that you have a void badger, so you could have closed the portals already. She asked. Well, we wanted to hold it on the ground for the chieftain to fight. We have a totem-ranked void blast skill which will do damage without the reduction of totemic protection, so we can damage it. But Lady Ray, the spider, is greatly looking forward to stabbing it. The priestess looked around at the situation. Well, with your abilities, you might be able to take it out. That defensive ability that your team has is quite effective. Carl nodded. I will extend it to Chief Snakebite for the duel as well. Limited invulnerability should make up for any undead draconic nonsense. The woman patted Carl on the head. How about you put it on me instead? Dragons should be the one to deal with an undead abomination like a bone dragon. Carl extended void body and impenetrable bulwark to the totem-ranked dragon cleric. She laughed and transformed into a battle-scarred red dragon with a wingspan so massive that it nearly covered the entire village. Through the portal, an equally massive skeletal dragon head appeared, followed by the rest of the bone dragon. Ray didn't hesitate. Chips of bone flew as she stabbed wildly at the dragon's back with her limbs and even called her golems onto his back to add more damage. The dragon pulsed with power, and Ray was sent flying across the battlefield over Carl's head and the village. Then she went incorporeal and skidded along the ground for a few dozen meters before coming to a stop. Satisfying. Ray sighed as she waited for her body to heal. Tastes terrible though. Like that cheese with the blue mold in it. February 10th, do not recommend. Kara agreed. The red dragon took to the sky where it was met by the bone dragon. A massive plume of fire met a cloud of black energy similar to the one that Naksha breathed. The black dragon and hawk had both retreated from the battle as dragon breath was indiscriminate and nothing was likely to survive this engagement. The two dragons crashed into each other, snapping and snarling as they clawed at scales and skeleton. Bones shattered as the red dragon's claws tore into the undead monstrosity. But in return, the bone dragon clamped its jaw down on her shoulder. Only it had no effect. The impenetrable bulwark skill reduced damage taken by 20% plus 1 point per day of age, and this particular red dragon was truly ancient. The undead creature's maw spewed black mist over her body, but the priestess continued to tear it apart, shattering bones and throwing them to the ground. It was a one-sided beating as a flurry of spells exploded ineffectually against the red dragon. The frantic death throes of a bone dragon which had realized that mortality applied to everything, including it. Chief Snakebite whistled in appreciation as the other clerics watched in awe. I have never seen anything like that. It's like she's got a whole rank on the undead, it can't do anything to her. One of the clerics that had arrived with the priestess noted quietly. It's a small advantage granted by having an impenetrable bulwark behemoth in the group. Carl whispered to them. The group looked over at Thor, who was watching with intense interest. If he were that old, he would be able to beat up ancient dragons as well. It was literally just a matter of time. Two massive claws hooked through the eye sockets of the bone dragon's skull, and the glow of power faded from the undead beast's body with a crack of shattering bone. Ray Shadow stepped forward to grab a large red gem that fell from the corpse. That would look pretty in her space, and she wasn't going to let anyone else claim it. Even if she hadn't been the one to kill the dragon. New shared skill gained Army of the Dead creates a retinue of undead guardians suited to the summoner. Damn it, I forgot to move my undead. Ray noted sadly. The Death Knights had been standing under the battle, and they were now a pile of ash and bone, destroyed by the aftermath of the clash between dragons. You can summon new ones later. Just not now. We don't want anyone to think we're still under attack, Carl suggested. Ray was worried that the spell wouldn't summon anything as cool as those Death Knights had been, but if the system didn't want to give her more golems, she would take these ones instead. Maybe she could get an army of bone spiders. The team didn't have nearly enough spiders. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.